$15. Rosie counted the crumpled bills for the 7th time, her small fingers trembling in the cold. Christmas Eve snow dusted the windows of Maple Diner as she guided her mother through the door, one arm wrapped around the woman's frail waist. Colleen's cheeks had gone hollow months ago, her breath shallow, but tonight she wore lipstick for the first time in a year. The girl had saved every penny from collecting cans and helping neighbors, just for this one meal, this one night when her mother could feel normal again. She didn't notice the man in the expensive coat watching from the corner booth, his young daughter tugging at his sleeve. She didn't see how his eyes lingered on her mother's trembling hands, or how his jaw tightened when she whispered to the waitress, "What's the cheapest thing on the menu?" What happened next would prove that sometimes the greatest gifts on Christmas Eve aren't wrapped in paper, but in something far more unexpected. The apartment smelled like medicine and silence. Rosie stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, brushing tangles from her hair with careful strokes, while steam rose from the pot of water she'd heated on the stove. The radiator had stopped working 3 days ago, and the landlord wouldn't come until after the holidays. She'd learned to boil water and pour it into mason jars, wrapping them in old towels, placing them beneath the blankets on her mother's bed. 12 years old, and she knew how to read prescription labels, how to crush pills into applesauce, how to wake at 3 in the morning when the coughing started. The apartment wasn't much, just 2 rooms on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator never worked. But it was home. Christmas lights from the neighbor's window cast colored shadows across the peeling wallpaper, red and green dancing like promises she wasn't sure the world could keep. In the bedroom, Colleen sat on the edge of the mattress, her breathing shallow and measured. She had been a nurse once, back when her lungs still worked properly, back when her husband still came home at night. 3 years ago, when the diagnosis came, he'd packed a single suitcase and left without looking back. Some people run from sickness like it's contagious. Some people confuse in sickness and in health with until things get difficult. Colleen never spoke about him anymore. The wedding ring had been sold long ago, converted into groceries and electricity bills, and the endless parade of medications that lined the kitchen counter like soldiers standing guard against the inevitable. Tonight, though, she wasn't thinking about him. She was watching her daughter in the doorway, holding up a faded blue dress that had once been her favorite. "Mom, I found it," Rosie said, her voice bright with manufactured cheer. "The one with the flowers on the collar. Remember? You wore it to my school concert." She crossed the room and laid the dress across her mother's lap, smoothing the wrinkles with hands that had grown old too quickly. Colleen looked down at the fabric, touching the embroidered flowers with fingers that trembled constantly now. The dress hung looser than it used to, testament to the weight she'd lost, the body that had become a stranger to her. But her daughter's eyes were shining with such hope, such desperate, determined hope, that she found herself nodding. She would wear the dress. She would go to dinner. She would pretend, for one night, that everything was normal. "Where did you get the money, sweetheart?" Colleen asked softly, watching Rosie's face in the dim light. The girl's cheeks flushed pink, and she busied herself with finding a pair of socks that didn't have holes in the toes. "School," Rosie said quickly, not meeting her mother's eyes. "They gave awards for attendance. I won $15. The lie hung in the air between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Colleen knew about the cans her daughter collected from the recycling bins behind the grocery store. She knew about the lawns Rosie had raked in autumn, the dogs she walked for the elderly woman on the 2nd floor, the errands she ran for anyone who would give her $1 or $2. $15, saved over months, coin by coin, crumpled bill by crumpled bill. A fortune in small hands. "That's wonderful, baby," Colleen said, and the words cost her something she couldn't name. "You must have worked very hard." Rosie finally looked up, and her smile was so bright it almost hurt to see. "I did, Mom. I really did. And tonight, we're going to eat at a real restaurant, with menus and everything, like regular people. She helped her mother into the dress, buttoning each button with careful concentration. The fabric smelled like lavender sachets and memories. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and white, covering the city in a blanket that made everything look clean and new and possible. Rosie wrapped a scarf around her mother's neck, tucked her into her warmest coat, and together they walked out into the Christmas Eve night, the cold air sharp against their faces, the sound of distant carols floating through the streets like prayers. Maple Diner sat on the corner of 5th and Harrison, its windows glowing amber in the darkness. The neon sign had lost a few letters over the years, now reading, "Me plaît d'heure," in flickering pink, but everyone in the neighborhood knew the place. It had been there for 40 years, serving coffee and pancakes, and the kind of comfort food that felt like a hug from someone who meant it. The bell above the door chimed as Rosie pushed it open, guiding her mother inside with one arm wrapped protectively around her waist. The warmth hit them immediately, along with the smell of bacon grease and fresh pie, and something sweet baking in the back. Christmas decorations hung from every available surface, tinsel and paper snowflakes, and a small artificial tree in the corner, its lights blinking in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Only a handful of tables were occupied, mostly elderly couples, and a few solitary figures nursing cups of coffee, all of them seeking somewhere warm to spend the holiday evening. Greta looked up from behind the counter, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, a crossword puzzle spread before her. She'd owned this diner for 30 years, ever since her husband passed and left her with a building and a dream and not much else. 60 years old, with silver hair pinned up in a practical bun, and hands that still remembered how to flip a perfect pancake, she'd seen everything these walls had to offer. Proposals and breakups, first dates and last meals. She'd served coffee to 3 generations of the same families, watched babies grow into teenagers, into adults who brought their own babies through the door. But something about the 2 figures who'd just entered made her set down her pen and pay attention. The girl was young, maybe 12, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, and eyes that seemed too old for her face. The woman she supported moved slowly, carefully, each step a small victory against whatever battle she was fighting inside her body. 2? Greta asked, already reaching for menus. Rosie nodded, helping her mother slide into a booth near the window. The vinyl seats were cracked but clean, patched in places with tape that had yellowed with age. Colleen leaned back against the cushion, her breath coming in small, controlled sips. The walk from the apartment, just 4 blocks, had exhausted her in ways she didn't want to admit. But she was here. She was sitting in a restaurant on Christmas Eve, across from her daughter, like a normal mother on a normal night. That had to count for something. Rosie took the menus from Greta with a polite, "Thank you, ma'am," and opened hers immediately, her eyes scanning not the names of dishes, but the numbers beside them. Math had always been her strongest subject. Now she used it to calculate survival. The door chimed again, and a gust of cold air swirled through the diner. Wade Prescott stepped inside, his daughter Penny's hand clasped firmly in his own. He wore a charcoal coat that probably cost more than Rosie's monthly rent, though nothing about him screamed wealthy. His watch was expensive, but understated. His shoes were Italian leather, but scuffed at the toes. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd built something from nothing, though that something had brought him more money than he'd ever imagined needing. CEO of Prescott Development, he'd spent the last 2 decades buying buildings and turning them into homes, offices, spaces where people could build their own lives. But all the money in the world hadn't saved his wife. Monica had died 2 years ago, cancer eating through her body with the same ruthless efficiency that Wade had once applied to business deals. Now it was just him and Penny, 9 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. "The usual booth, Mr. Prescott?" Greta called out, her voice warm with recognition. Wade nodded, guiding Penny toward the corner table that had been Monica's favorite. She'd loved this place, the unpretentious charm of it, the way Greta remembered everyone's name, the pie that tasted like someone's grandmother had made it with love. Every Christmas Eve since her death, Wade and Penny came here. They ordered her favorite meal, shared her favorite dessert, and talked about the woman who had made their family whole. It was their ritual, their way of keeping her present even in absence. Penny slid into the booth, her face drawn with that particular sadness that holidays bring to those who have lost someone. She'd been 7 when her mother died, old enough to remember, young enough to still believe that somehow, some way, she might come back. Wade was about to open his menu when he heard it. A small voice, barely above a whisper, coming from the booth across the aisle. "Mom, are you sure you're not hungry? You should eat something." He glanced over instinctively and saw the girl from the door leaning toward her mother with an expression of barely contained worry. The woman, thin as a whisper, shook her head slowly. "I ate earlier, honey. You order whatever you want." The lie was obvious, even from where Wade sat. The woman's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, and he recognized that particular kind of weakness, that careful marshaling of energy that came with fighting a war inside your own body. He'd watched Monica do the same thing, pretending strength she didn't have, pretending appetite she'd long since lost, all to spare her daughter the weight of worry. "Daddy, can I have hot chocolate?" Penny asked, tugging at his sleeve. Wade turned back to her, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. With extra marshmallows?" But even as he spoke, his attention kept drifting back to the other table, to the girl who was studying the menu with the intensity of someone solving a complex equation. He watched her lips move silently as she added numbers in her head, watched her shoulders tense as she reached the total, watched her put down the menu and fold her hands in her lap with a kind of resigned determination that no 12-year-old should ever have to feel. When Greta came to take their order, the girl spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "1 short stack of pancakes, please, and a glass of water." Greta looked at the woman, waiting. "Nothing for me," Colleen said softly. "I'm not hungry." Greta hesitated, her pen hovering above her pad, something flickering behind her eyes that looked like recognition of a familiar pain. The pancakes arrived 10 minutes later, 3 perfect circles stacked on a white plate, a small cup of syrup on the side. Rosie looked at them for a long moment, then carefully cut the stack in half. She slid the plate toward the center of the table, pushing one half toward her mother with a smile that tried its best to look casual. "I ordered too much," she said. "Help me finish." Colleen looked at the pancakes, then at her daughter's face, and something inside her cracked open like an egg. She'd spent so many months trying to protect this child from the truth of their situation, from the reality of what was coming. But Rosie already knew. Of course she knew. Children always know more than we give them credit for. They feel the shape of silence, the weight of things unsaid. Colleen picked up her fork, hand shaking slightly, and cut a small piece. "They're delicious," she said, even though she could barely taste anything anymore. "Best pancakes I've ever had." Across the aisle, Wade watched the exchange with a tightening in his chest that he hadn't felt in months. Penny had noticed too. "Daddy," she whispered, leaning close. "Why does that girl look so worried?" Wade didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about Monica, about the last Christmas Eve she'd been well enough to come here, about how she'd spent half the meal watching a young couple at the next table, clearly in love, clearly poor, clearly happy despite it all. "Kindness isn't about money," she'd told him that night, her hand warm in his. It's about presence, about being there, about seeing people. He'd dismissed it then, too focused on his empire building, on acquisitions and mergers, on the numbers that made up his measure of success. Now those words echoed in his head like a prophecy he was only beginning to understand. "Penny," he said quietly, "do you remember what Mommy used to say about Christmas?" His daughter's face softened at the mention of her mother. "She said it's not about presents, it's about presence, being there for people." Wade nodded, his throat tight. "That's right, sweetheart. That's exactly right." He watched Rosie pour more syrup on her mother's portion, watched her pretend she wasn't hungry, so there would be more for the woman across from her, watched a child carry the weight of the world on shoulders too small to bear it. He wanted to help. Every instinct in him screamed to walk over there, to pay their bill, to offer money, assistance, anything. But he'd learned something in the years since Monica's death, something about pride and dignity and the complicated calculus of charity. You could hurt people by helping them wrong. You could strip away the last thing they had, their sense of self-worth, by making them feel like objects of pity rather than fellow human beings worthy of respect. Greta had seen the whole thing, 30 years behind this counter, and she'd developed a sixth sense for stories unfolding in her booths. She knew without asking that the woman with the girl was sick, probably dying, probably had been for a while. She knew the girl had saved that money herself, could see it in the careful way she counted each dollar, each cent. And she knew Wade Prescott, knew he was watching, knew he wanted to do something but couldn't figure out what. She'd served him and Monica for years, had cried at the funeral, had watched him come back here month after month, trying to keep his wife alive in the only way he could. Now she saw something in his eyes that she recognized, that particular ache of wanting to help without knowing how. "Excuse me," Rosie said, flagging Greta down with a small wave. "Could I get the check, please?" Greta nodded, scribbling on her pad, but before she could tear off the slip, she felt a hand on her arm. Wade had crossed the diner without her noticing, moving with a quiet purpose. "Greta," he said softly, leaning close so only she could hear. "Let me tell you a story." He spoke for 2 minutes, maybe 3, his voice low and steady. He told her about Monica, about Christmas Eve's past, about something his wife had said once that he'd never forgotten. Greta listened, her eyes growing soft, then bright with something that looked like an idea taking shape. "I think I know what you mean," she said when he finished. "Leave it to me." She walked into the kitchen, disappearing through the swinging door. Wade returned to his booth, catching Penny's curious look with a small shake of his head. "Just wait," he told her. "Watch." A few minutes later, Greta emerged carrying a silver tray. On it sat a Christmas pie, latticed crust golden brown, steam rising from the slits in delicate curls. She walked to the center of the diner, between Wade's table and Rosie's, and cleared her throat loudly enough to catch everyone's attention. "All right, folks," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades of diner management. "It's Christmas Eve, and I've got a tradition to uphold. Every year, strangers share a table and share a story. The pie's on the house, but you've got to earn it by making a new friend. You too," she pointed at Wade and Penny. "And you two," she pointed at Rosie and Colleen. "You're sitting too far apart. Scoot together. It's Christmas." For a moment, no one moved. Rosie looked at her mother, uncertain. Colleen looked at the man and his daughter, at the expensive coat and the kind eyes, and the little girl who seemed somehow as sad as she felt. Wade stood first, offering a gentle smile. "She's not kidding," he said. "I've seen her throw people out for less. May we join you?" Penny was already sliding out of the booth, her earlier sadness temporarily forgotten in the face of a new situation. She crossed to Rosie's table and, without waiting for an answer, slid in next to her. "Hi," she said brightly. "I'm Penny. My daddy says Christmas is about presents. Do you like pie?" "I really like pie." Rosie blinked, caught off guard by the whirlwind of the younger girl. But something about Penny's openness, her unguarded friendliness, made it impossible not to respond. "I'm Rosie," she said quietly. "And yeah, I like pie." Wade helped Colleen shift to make room, his movements careful and respectful. He sat across from her, next to his daughter, and for a moment the four of them just looked at each other, strangers thrust together by a waitress with a heart bigger than her diner. Greta arrived with plates, forks, and a knife to cut the pie. "This here's my grandmother's recipe," she said, serving generous slices. "Ate it every Christmas of my childhood. Now, I make it every year to share. Eat up, all of you. And talk to each other, for heaven's sake. That's the whole point." She retreated to the counter, but Wade caught the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes, the small nod she gave him when no one else was looking. "So," Wade said, turning to Rosie with genuine curiosity, "tell me about yourself. What's your favorite subject in school?" The question was so ordinary, so completely normal, that Rosie felt something loosen in her chest. No one had asked her about school in months. No one had talked to her like a regular kid with regular interests in so long that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. "Science," she said after a moment. "I like learning how things work. Biology mostly, how bodies heal themselves." She glanced at her mother, then away, but Wade caught the meaning beneath the words. This was a girl trying to understand the enemy that was taking her mother away, trying to find some logic in the chaos of illness and loss. "Penny's good at science, too," Wade said, ruffling his daughter's hair. "She built a volcano for the school science fair, made such a mess in the kitchen that I'm still finding baking soda in the cabinets." Penny giggled, a sound like bells. It was a really good volcano, though. It won second place. Colleen smiled, the first real smile she'd worn in weeks. "My daughter's always been curious," she said softly. "Even as a baby, she wanted to know how everything worked. She'd take apart her toys just to see the inside." Her voice was thin but warm, and Wade heard in it the same pride he felt when he talked about Penny, that fierce, overwhelming love that parenthood brings. "What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?" Wade said, addressing Colleen with the kind of respect that felt rare and valuable. She hesitated, the old instinct to deflect rising up. But something about this man, his calm presence, his genuine interest, made her want to answer honestly. "I was a nurse," she said. 20 years at St. Mary's Hospital, pediatric ward mostly. I always loved working with kids." She paused, her eyes drifting to Rosie. "Now I'm on the other side of the care. It's different being the patient. You see things from a new angle." Wade nodded slowly. "My wife was sick for a long time," he said, the words coming easier than he expected. "Cancer. We had some of the best doctors money could buy, but in the end, it wasn't enough. She passed 2 years ago." The table went quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that comes when people recognize each other's pain, when shared experience builds a bridge across the gulf of strangerhood. Penny reached out and took Rosie's hand, a gesture so simple and so kind that it made Colleen's eyes sting with tears. "My mommy's in heaven," Penny said matter-of-factly. "Is your mommy sick too?" Rosie swallowed hard, looking at her mother. Colleen gave a small nod, permission granted. "Yeah," Rosie said quietly. "She is." Penny squeezed her hand tighter. "It's okay to be scared," she said. "I was scared too. But my daddy says we have to love people extra hard when they're sick, so they know we'll remember them forever." Wade cleared his throat, emotions he'd kept locked away threatening to spill over. He'd spent 2 years building walls around his heart, protecting Penny, protecting himself, going through the motions of living without really feeling any of it. But sitting here in this worn-out diner, sharing pie with strangers who understood his pain, he felt those walls begin to crack. "My wife used to say something," he began, his voice rough. "She said that kindness isn't about money, it's about presence, about really seeing people, being there for them." He looked at Colleen, at Rosie, at the half-eaten pancakes, and the carefully counted change. "I have more money than I know what to do with. But I couldn't buy her one more day. I couldn't pay for a miracle. All those years building my business, I thought I was building security. Turns out the only thing that matters is time, and we never have enough of it." Colleen felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. There was no shame in crying here, no need to pretend strength she didn't have. "I know exactly what you mean," she said. "When I got sick, I thought about all the things I'd put off, all the some days that might never come. But then I realized I hadn't put off the important things. I'd spent every day with my daughter, every moment I could, and that's worth more than any regret." She reached across the table and covered Rosie's hand with her own. "This one saved her money for months just to bring me here tonight. $15, and she wanted to spend it making me feel normal. That's not poverty. That's love. That's the richest I've ever been." The conversation flowed easier after that, like a river finding its natural course. They talked about Monica, about her laugh and her terrible jokes, and the way she used to burn toast every single morning because she always got distracted by the birds at the window. They talked about Colleen's nursing days, about babies she'd helped bring into the world, about families she'd supported through the worst moments of their lives. They talked about Rosie's dreams of becoming a doctor, about Penny's obsession with horses, about the strange and wonderful way that four strangers could become something more over a shared slice of pie. The diner emptied around them, other customers trickling out into the snow. But Greta kept the coffee coming, kept the lights on, kept watch over her unlikely gathering with a satisfaction that made 30 years of Christmas Eves worth every tired bone in her body. When the time came to pay, Rosie reached for her pocket, fingers closing around the crumpled bills she'd counted so many times. But Wade shook his head, subtle enough that Colleen didn't notice, and said, "Hey, Rosie, could you help Penny pick out a candy from the counter? I want to talk to your mom for a second." The girl slid out of the booth, Penny already chattering about her favorite chocolates, and Wade leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. "I'm not going to offer to pay your bill," he said. "I can see that money means something to your daughter. It's her gift to you, and I won't take that away from her." Colleen felt her shoulders relax, a tension she hadn't even realized she was holding finally releasing. "Thank you," she whispered. "Most people don't understand." "I understand more than you know," Wade replied. "But I want you to have my number, not for money, not for charity. Just if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who gets it, or if Rosie needs a friend for Penny. She's been lonely since her mother passed. They both seem to connect tonight." He slid a business card across the table, plain white with simple black text. Colleen looked at it for a long moment, then tucked it into her pocket. "You're a good man, Wade Prescott. Your wife must have been remarkable." Wade's smile was sad but genuine. "She was. And so are you. What you're doing for your daughter, being present even when it hurts, that's the hardest kind of love there is. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Rosie returned with Penny in tow, both girls clutching candy canes, their earlier shyness transformed into something that looked like the beginning of friendship. She marched up to the counter where Greta was waiting, pulled the $15 from her pocket, and laid it on the counter with quiet dignity. "For the pancakes, please." Greta looked at the money, then at the girl, then at Wade, who gave a subtle shake of his head from across the room. "That'll be $4.50, sweetheart," she said, making change from the register. You keep the rest. Save it for something special." Rosie hesitated, suspicion flickering in her eyes. But Greta's expression was matter-of-fact, businesslike, leaving no room for argument. "That's the price on the menu. Holiday discount. Now get your mama home safe, you hear?" Outside, the snow had thickened, transforming the street into a Christmas card scene. Wade helped Colleen into her coat, carefully wrapping the scarf around her neck, the way Rosie had earlier. Penny and Rosie exchanged phone numbers, Rosie carefully writing down the landline at her apartment on a napkin, Penny inputting it into her father's phone with the seriousness of someone handling state secrets. "I'll call you tomorrow," Penny promised. "After presents, we can talk about stuff." Rosie nodded, and for the first time all night, she looked like the child she still was, hopeful and excited and young. "I'd like that," she said quietly. They parted on the sidewalk, Colleen leaning heavily on Rosie's arm, Wade hoisting Penny onto his shoulders, despite her protests that she was too old for that. The snow fell between them like a curtain, soft and white, erasing footprints as quickly as they were made. Wade watched the mother and daughter walk away, two figures growing smaller in the darkness, and felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. Or the simple recognition that even in the depths of grief, there was still good to be done, still connections to be made, still love to be given and received. "Daddy?" Penny said from above him, her voice small. "Will we see them again?" Wade thought about Monica, about her words, about the way she'd always believed in the invisible threads that connected people across circumstances and time. "I hope so, sweetheart," he said. "I really hope so." They walked home through the snow, past houses glowing with Christmas lights, past families gathered around trees, past all the ordinary magic of an ordinary holiday night. And Wade realized, for the first time in 2 years, that he didn't feel quite so alone. Rosie helped her mother up the 4 flights of stairs, pausing at each landing to let her catch her breath. The apartment was cold when they entered, the radiator still broken. But Rosie had prepared for this. She guided Colleen to the bed, tucked her in with blankets and hot water bottles, and sat beside her in the darkness, holding her hand. "Mom," she said softly, "this was the best Christmas Eve I've ever had." Colleen smiled, her eyes already growing heavy with exhaustion. "Me too, baby girl, me too." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "That man, Wade, he lost someone too. You could see it in his eyes." Rosie nodded. "I know. Penny told me. Her mom died from cancer. Just like. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Colleen understood. "Come here," Colleen said, lifting the blanket. Rosie crawled in beside her, curling up against her mother's thin body, feeling the fragile warmth between them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, softening the edges of a world that could be so hard and sharp. "Rosie," Colleen whispered, "I want you to remember something. Whatever happens, however much time we have, you made me happy. Every single day, you made me feel like the luckiest mother in the world. That's not nothing. That's everything." Rosie pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, tears soaking into the faded blue dress with the flowers on the collar. "I love you, Mom." Colleen stroked her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. "I love you too, my brave girl. I love you too." Across town, Wade carried a sleeping Penny through the front door of their house. It was too big, this place, too empty since Monica had gone. He'd thought about selling it 100 times, but he couldn't bring himself to let go of the memories, the echo of her laughter in the hallways, the ghost of her presence in every room. He laid Penny in her bed, kissed her forehead, and stood watching her sleep for a long moment. She looked so much like her mother, the same stubborn chin, the same way her nose wrinkled when she dreamed. He wondered what Monica would think of tonight, of the strangers they'd met, of the strange alchemy that had brought them together in a run-down diner on Christmas Eve. He walked to the window of Penny's room, looking out at the snow-covered yard. Somewhere out there, a girl named Rosie was counting her remaining dollars. A woman named Colleen was fighting a battle she would probably lose, and both of them were facing the kind of poverty that no amount of money could fix. The poverty of time, of days running out like sand through fingers. But tonight, for a few hours, they hadn't been alone. Tonight, 4 strangers had shared a table and a story, had found in each other the particular comfort that comes from being seen, from being understood. That was Monica's legacy, Wade realized. Not the buildings he'd built, not the deals he'd closed, but this. The knowledge that presence matters more than presence, that kindness isn't about what you give, but about who you are. Greta closed up the diner at midnight, wiping down the tables, stacking the chairs, turning off the Christmas lights one string at a time. She paused at the booth where they'd sat, running her hand over the worn vinyl, thinking about all the stories these seats had held over the years. 30 Christmas Eves, and this one was different. This one had reminded her why she kept the doors open on holidays, why she made her grandmother's pie, why she believed in the stubborn, impractical magic of human connection. She locked the door behind her, stepped out into the snow, and looked up at the sky. The clouds had parted slightly, revealing a scatter of stars. "Merry Christmas," she said to no one and everyone. Then she walked home, her footsteps muffled by the snow, her heart full of the kind of warmth that no heater could provide. Rosie woke early Christmas morning, her mother still sleeping beside her. She slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace, and went to the window. The city was white, transformed overnight into something beautiful and strange. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the remaining money, the change from the pancakes, $10.50. She'd been saving for so long, counting every penny, dreaming of this night. And now it was over, and her mother had smiled, had laughed, had looked like herself again for a few precious hours. That was worth more than any amount of money. That was worth everything. She placed the money back in her savings jar, but this time she didn't count it with worry. She counted it with hope. There would be other meals, other small victories, other moments of normalcy stolen from the jaws of everything that threatened to take them away. And maybe, just maybe, there would be new friends, a girl named Penny, who understood what it meant to lose someone, a father named Wade, who knew that the greatest gifts aren't wrapped in paper. Rosie looked out at the snow, at the Christmas morning dawning clean and bright, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something that might have been peace, not the end of struggle, not the absence of fear, but something quieter and deeper, the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that kindness could come from unexpected places, that even in the darkest winters, there were still people who would share a table and a story. Colleen woke to the sound of her daughter humming in the kitchen, the smell of instant coffee brewing, the distant chime of church bells ringing in the morning. She lay there for a moment, gathering her strength, remembering the night before. The diner, the pie, the man with the kind eyes and his lonely daughter. The way Rosie had looked, sitting across from Penny, like a regular kid having a regular conversation with a regular friend. That image would stay with her, Colleen decided. Whatever happened next, however many days she had left, she would carry that picture in her heart. Proof that her daughter would be okay, that the world still held good people, that love could find you in the most unexpected places. She reached into her coat pocket, hanging on the chair beside the bed, and pulled out the business card. Wade Prescott. A phone number, nothing more. But in that simple piece of paper, she saw a lifeline, a connection, a promise that Rosie would have someone to call when the worst finally came. She tucked it back into the pocket, safely, carefully and closed her eyes. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The sun was coming up, pale gold light spilling through the window, catching the dust motes floating in the air. It was Christmas Day, and she was alive, and her daughter was singing in the kitchen, and somewhere across the city, a little girl named Penny was probably opening presents, while a father named Wade watched with that particular ache of missing someone you loved. And in a diner on the corner of 5th and Harrison, Greta was already unlocking the door, turning on the coffee pot, preparing for another day of stories. The booth by the window was empty now, waiting for its next occupants, its next chapter. But the pie dish from last night still sat in the kitchen, washed and dried, and ready to be filled again. Christmas tradition, strangers sharing a table, sharing a story. Sometimes that was all it took. Sometimes the greatest gifts weren't wrapped in paper at all, but in moments, in connections, in the simple act of being present for another human being. And sometimes, on a cold Christmas Eve, a poor girl with $15 and a rich man with an empty heart could find in each other exactly what they needed most. Not charity, not pity, but the profound and irreplaceable gift of being seen. Rosie brought her mother coffee in bed, weak and too sweet, just the way she liked it. She sat on the edge of the mattress, watching Colleen sip it slowly, her hands steadier this morning than they'd been in weeks. "Mom," she said, "Penny wants to call me today. Is that okay?" Colleen smiled, that real smile that made everything worthwhile. "Of course, baby. Of course it's okay." She set down the coffee cup and reached for her daughter's hand. "You know, last night, when we were sitting in that booth, I felt normal. I felt like myself again. Thank you for that, Rosie. Thank you for giving me that gift." Rosie squeezed her mother's fingers, thin and fragile as bird bones. "It wasn't just me," she said. "It was all of us. Even the pie lady." Colleen laughed, a sound like water over stones. Even the pie lady, especially the pie lady. The phone rang at 2 o'clock, and Rosie ran to answer it. Penny's voice came through the line, bright and excited, talking about presents and snow, and asking if Rosie had ever built a snowman before. They talked for an hour, then 2, the kind of rambling conversation that only children can have, full of tangents and non sequiturs and sudden bursts of laughter. In the background, Rosie could hear Wade's voice, deep and steady, occasionally interjecting with offers of hot chocolate or reminders to let Rosie get a word in. It felt normal. It felt like what holidays were supposed to be, full of warmth and connection and the simple pleasure of human company. When they finally hung up, Rosie returned to her mother's bedside. Colleen was sleeping again, her breathing slow and even, a small smile still playing at the corners of her lips. Rosie sat beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting each breath like a treasure. $15 had bought them a night to remember, a connection that might last longer than any of them expected, and the knowledge that even in the hardest times, there was still good in the world. She pulled the blanket up to her mother's chin, kissed her forehead gently, and whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you, Christmas." And somewhere, in the snow-covered silence of a winter afternoon, it felt like the universe whispered back,